Hello and welcome to this tutorial on voiceover processing in Adobe Audition. I'm Rob Mazes for Tuts Plus, but you may know me as the founder of HomeStudioCenter.com. And I can't wait to show you in this tutorial the quickest and easiest and most efficient way to process a voiceover or voice recording within Adobe Audition. And by the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to process your voiceover to sound clearer, warmer, more dynamically consistent by using compression. And we're also going to go into some basic editing tools. And Adobe Audition's a really good piece of software for editing voiceover. That's what it's most commonly used for. It's kind of a fully featured DAW like Pro Tools and Logic, but it's more geared towards voiceover processing and work on audio for video, essentially. So the first thing we want to do is import some audio. And I've just got a basic book reading extract that I'm going to use. So we just click that WAV and click open. Now the first view that you'll see is this window here, which is the waveform editor. And this is the waveform here that we can see quite clearly. Let's have a listen. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. So just a book reading extract, a bit of noise in the background on purpose there so we can remove that. But other than that, quite clean, sounding good. So let's start off by editing this voiceover. There's a bit at the end where the word actually gets cut off. Let's listen. From writing for several weeks. So we're not going to be able to use this section here. So let's find the end of this phrase. Or they wait for inspiration. Inspiration doesn't really exist. So we're going to cut it there. So what I'm going to do is highlight all of this. And I'm going to press delete. And there we go. That's edited away. And now let's also get rid of the beginning so that it goes straight into it. Now what we might also want to do is add a fade out to the end of this. So I'm going to grab this icon here, drag it in, and that will just fade out any noise that's at the end there. Inspiration doesn't really exist. Just to make it sound a bit more natural. Now what we can actually do is go through and silence the bits between the words. And you would only want to do this if you're working on a relatively short voiceover, like a short video or just an introductory video, something like that. If you're working on a long voiceover for an online course or an audiobook, you're not going to have time to do this, and we're going to look at noise removal tools in a second. But what you can do is highlight any section, right-click, and go silence. And now what you'll hear is that the noise drops out for that little gap. Leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. So whenever there's a gap that you want to get rid of, you need to silence it. Because you'll notice if I highlight it and press delete, it shuffles it all forwards, and that's going to mess with the timing of your voiceover. So make sure you use the silence function there. Now, once you're done editing, it's now time to try some noise removal. So the first thing we're going to do is highlight a section of noise. We're then going to right click and we're going to go to capture noise print and hit OK. Then we're going to go to the effects rack and we're going to click on effect number 1, noise reduction and adaptive noise reduction, and hit OK. Now what we see here is a few parameters. This is the most important one, reduce noise by. And up here it's probably going to sound unnatural. Down here it's not going to do anything at all. Now we can also adjust the signal threshold. That's another important parameter, and a few other ones. We're just going to use the preset, so we're going to go to light noise reduction. And now we're going to tune this in. So let's listen to how this parameter affects the audio. To become an idea machine. So you could still hear the noise there. Now let's try it full. To become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get... Now you can hear that sounded a bit strange. It made my words sound a bit phasey. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more... So what we can actually do is normally, I think the default here is actually around 15. Yep. So first of all, let's just apply that and see if it helps. Because what we can do here in the effects rack is add several effects, and some of them work quite well in real time, like EQ and compression. But we got a pop-up a second ago that you may have noticed that said, this effect doesn't work too well in real time. So let's hit apply. And now that effect has actually been applied to the waveform itself. So we can't see it here anymore. It's been applied to this. So let's have a listen. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come down and give them ideas to put on that pad. Or they wait for inspiration. Inspiration doesn't really exist. So not too convincing, there's still quite a lot of noise going on there. But play around with that tool, find the settings that work for your audio until you remove that noise. Now what we're going to do is apply EQ. And we're going to be really subtle with this, and this is where most people go wrong. We're going to use the parametric equalizer, because this allows us to boost and cut pretty much any frequency. I can move this around and boost or cut anywhere. Now, the deceiving thing about the Adobe Audition equalizer is that this scale is pretty huge. So if you're boosting a frequency by 40 dBs, that's always going to sound awful. And my recommendation, especially with voiceover, where you want it to sound natural and subtle, is to never boost by more than 5 dBs. And a lot of the time, 3 dBs is going to be enough. Now, we can also adjust the width, and the wider we make it, the more natural sound. So something like that is going to sound a lot more natural than something like that. So first of all, I'm going to listen to this voiceover and think about how perhaps the sound could be improved. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important. First of all, I'm going to get rid of that noise because that's kind of ruining it for me. I'm going to tune that in later. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to... So maybe we could add a bit more clarity, and we're also going to make sure there's no low-end noise getting in the way. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a high-pass filter. So I'm going to click high-pass there, leave that on 24, and I'm going to drag this up to about 50. And what this does is cuts out any low-end noise, so that'll probably help with the background noise a bit. Let's listen. How to become an idea machine. We could even try it, making it even higher. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Now what I'm going to do is try adding a bit of a high shelf just to add some clarity, but this might actually boost the noise. Let's listen. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come down and give them ideas. So that's adding kind of very, very top end air and shimmer. If you want to add clarity, between 2 to 6K is actually a good place to boost. So we're going to center this around 4,000 and just a subtle 2.5 dB boost. Become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come. And we can also try and cut some of the muddiness around 300 down and give them ideas to put on that pad. Or they wait for inspiration. Inspiration doesn't really exist. And always remember to check your before and after. Become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. So that's sounding good to me. The next thing we're going to want to do is compress it. So we're going to go to amplitude and compression and single band compressor. Now here there is a preset for voiceover. I recommend you go to that, but we're going to adjust these slightly. We're going to make the release a bit faster, somewhere around 24, and make the attack a tad faster as well. And we're going to make the ratio a lot lower because we want this to be really subtle. So keep it below 3. I'm going to go for a 2:1 ratio. And now what we're going to do is bring up the output gain by about 4. That's about right. And I'm going to move this threshold parameter around until I can hear the compressor working. Now it'll be quite hard to hear it working if you're not used to using compression. And this is one of the downsides of Audition, is you don't have a visual reference of what the compressor is doing like in most DAWs. So if you're just starting out with compression, it might be worth practicing in Reaper or Logic or Pro Tools, something like that. But you should be able to hear quite simply what's going on. So let's try that. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come down and give them ideas to put on that pad. Or they wait for inspiration. Inspiration doesn't really exist. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come down and give them ideas. And you want to make sure it's the same volume coming out as going in, which is why I'm constantly toggling on and off here and moving the output gain. Put on that pad. Or they wait for inspiration. Inspiration doesn't really exist. Great. So it's worth noting as well that the levels of your voiceover should be averaging around -18. The mental body is the third leg of... If it's not averaging around -18, you can use the gain adjustment here for the daily practice. It is no more or... So you can see mine's kind of between -18 and -6, and that's what you want. If it's not, if it's too loud, you can turn it down here, and then it will apply it to the waveform, or equally, you can turn it up here until it's in that -18 sweet spot. Once you finish with your compressor, we can now add a limiter. And you might not want to add a limiter. It depends what kind of sound you're going for. If you want to keep it really subtle, then I wouldn't worry about adding a limiter. If you want it to be really loud, you need to add a limiter. But if you're not too fussed about loudness and you want to maintain the dynamics and the organic kind of natural sound, then don't use a limiter. But let's add one now. So we go to hard limiter, and we're going to go to light, and then we're going to change the maximum amplitude to 0.1, or minus 0.1 rather. Now what we're going to do here is just adjust the input boost until the volume's coming up a bit more so that it's peaking around 0, but the limiter will make sure it never actually clips. But instead we want to be averaging around -8. So let's just adjust the input until we see the audio around that -8 area. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come down and give them ideas to put on that pad. So you can hear the difference in volume there. Let's start that without the limiter. Or they wait for inspiration. And with the limiter, inspiration doesn't really exist. So you can hear that makes a huge difference. Make sure you have a slow release time so it sounds natural, and keep it subtle. Always err on the side of caution. If you're not sure if you're pushing it too hard, then always err on the side of caution. Now what I'm going to do is actually go through and remove that noise for good. So you can see how long it can take there to tune it in. You just need to tweak around those settings until you've got it right. It just shows the importance of recording in a good environment. If it's an outdoors video, then of course it doesn't matter if there's a bit of background noise. If it's a voiceover or an audiobook, you need to make sure that you're recording in a quiet environment without noise. But nevertheless, let's have a listen. So this is before noise reduction. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come. And now let's do it with noise reduction. And you'll notice there are some artifacts that needs more tweaking. But let's have a listen. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. It is no more or less important than the other three legs. Many people get stuck here. They sit down with a pad and wait for a god to come down and give them ideas to put on that pad. Off and then on. Or they wait for inspiration. And then what you can do if you want is go through and silence these bits between, just to make sure it's sounding good. Pad. Or they wait for inspiration to put on that pad. Or they wait for inspiration to come down and give them ideas to put on that pad. Or they wait for So now let's listen before everything, before EQ, compression, etc., and then after. So this is before. This is what it sounded like originally. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. And then this was with all of our effects now on. How to become an idea machine. The mental body is the third leg of the daily practice. So just an introduction into voiceover processing in Adobe Audition. If you want to go into more depth into EQ and compression, there are quite a few articles over on Tuts Plus about EQ and compression specifically for voiceover. So make sure to go check those out. Thanks again for watching, and until next time.